Esports, they age. And some esports titles age like wine, and some age more like milk. So I started thinking about this very subject when the Stormgate alpha footage was released. And it just kind of hit me that this might be the first title that seriously challenges StarCraft 2's iron grip on the RTS esports. It's kind of uncomfortable me to think about this, but StarCraft 2 esports might cease to exist in the form that we've all become accustomed to over the last 13 odd years. And now this is obviously highly speculatory, but I do think it's an interesting thought to explore further in this video. So I kind of want to think about what factors determine the seemingly inevitable decline of any esports title. So over the last 20 to 30 years, we've seen a number of esports titles rise and fall. But why? So there's a couple reasons that I can come up with right away on the top of my head, and I think you'll all agree that it seems to be something like technology improving and audience expectations changing. Maybe there are spiritual or just successors that improve on the original formula, or maybe it's the esports pie that just kind of outgrows the pieces, where esports grows faster than any singular title, making it seem like they're smaller, right? Like in comparison to other esports titles. And those are just some reasons that we can come up with on the top of our heads, but in the end, it's about two things. It's about what are people playing and what are people watching, which implicitly asks the question of loyalty. What does it take for people to abandon an esports title? We partially just answered that question really when we started talking about the highs and lows of an esports title, but does the individual esports enjoyer really make decisions based on those reasons? Like, usually the game just kind of stops being a priority for a person for one reason or another. Now, I thought it would be interesting to look at a few more recent modern cases to try and further understand how esports titles fare throughout their years. And firstly, I think it makes sense to mention Brood War, StarCraft 2's predecessor, Brood War. So Brood War has a strong cultural roots. It has strong cultural roots in Korea, and it has been more popular than the StarCraft 2 over there for most of their coexistence. Globally, however, Brood War's scene has always been kind of small and likely smaller than StarCraft 2's. And when StarCraft 2 was released, I think it certainly impacted Brood War because, obviously a lot of talent, players, eyeballs, leagues, and money all kind of shifted their attention towards StarCraft 2, which caused kind of like a downturn or maybe even a kind of dark age for Brood War. But I think it has obviously clawed its way back into relevance, at least in Korea. And what we can get from this is that something about this game could not be replaced by StarCraft 2. Even though it's the successor, right? It's the newer, bigger, shinier game. But apparently, Brood War scratches a certain itch that StarCraft 2, to this day, can't quite scratch. You can call it the essence or X factor or whatever Brood War has. It has not been sufficiently replaced or improved upon or aged out to become obsolete. Now, another title that does this, I think, even more clearly is Super Smash Bros. Melee for the Nintendo GameCube and currently also Dolphin Emulator. This game could have been replaced through any of the factors named earlier: successors, obsolete technology, new toys, and even the sands of time just passing us by. Yet it has managed to persist. Its direct successor, Brawl, and these subsequent successors were all rejected by the Melee community. The new games just did not scratch that same itch. And there have also been plenty of spiritual successors, with Project M, P+, and others having varying degrees of success of trying to emulate that itch. But no platform fighter has managed to really succeed Melee and scratching the right itch. So what is interesting though is Melee's actual successors themselves. When Smash 4 came out, the Brawl scene never recovered. And then Ultimate came out, and Smash 4 actually died overnight. Now, these are console-based games, which makes them, I think, inherently more susceptible to becoming obsolete with the aging of their native hardware. Which is where the Brood War Remastered update and the Wii modding / Slippy era become noticeable milestones in the longevity of these titles. It's kind of a chicken and egg type situation where do these esports persevere because of these updates? Or do these updates happen because the esports titles are still quote unquote alive? And it's probably not the right way to look at it. And if you want to answer that question, it's probably both. The updates only make sense for a title that still has a pulse, and it will strengthen that pulse when implemented. Although I think it's very important to notice that these updates are playability and quality of life updates. It's not necessarily gameplay, content, balance type updates. It's all about being able to pick up and play the game without having to jump through 16 hoops. Now, if we look at a different title, Counter-Strike, we see a slightly different story. Counter-Strike 1.6 was scratching the itch for the longest time, after which Source became a partial successor and kind of split the Counter-Strike community. Not unlike what happened with Melee and Brawl. But then CSGO eventually managed to succeed both of these games successfully, kind of merging back both of these communities together, which is now likely going to give way to Counter-Strike 2, since this successor is shaping up to be very similar, but just better than CSGO. So apparently CSGO was eventually able to scratch the same itch for 1.6ers and sourcers alike. I think that's quite impressive. And even more impressive if you consider that it currently coexists with Valorant and also other shooter games in the genre. These games, to a layman, seem to scratch a pretty similar itch, judging from that the players kind of switch between both more regularly than I've seen in other genres. But that leads me to believe that the sheer size of the tag shooting genre, together with the relative quality of both games, enables them to perhaps coexist. Flat out, the pie is just big enough for both. And I think we see the same for League of Legends and Dota 2. The MOBA pie is also very big. So, having looked at a couple of examples, I now want to attempt to wrap this up in more of a cohesive manner. So, I think that to decide where in the life cycle of an esports title the title is, we need to look at the following three things. We look at accessibility. How easy is it to play / get into said game? 2, uniqueness or unique selling points. Does the title scratch an itch that no other game feasibly can scratch? And lastly, fertility of the scene. So, is the esports pie as a whole growing or shrinking? Or at least that genre. So, with those three in mind, let's try and answer my original question. What will StarCraft 2 do? So, if we look at the first point, accessibility, I think StarCraft 2 is very easy to download, to play, and to enjoy. You can play it for free in the same launcher as a bunch of other games that you might already be playing right now. And you even get the first campaign for free. The game is also being maintained relatively well with an active multiplayer ladder, so I think accessibility is a big plus for StarCraft 2. We can keep on playing this game for years to come. Secondly, we have fertility. So, looking at the esports scene as a whole in 2023 right now, we have hit a bit of a recession, I think that's fair to say. A lot of parties that were throwing money into the bottomless esports pit have stopped throwing said money, and the proverbial bubble has burst. And we are now in the process of bouncing back to a more sustainable status quo. For StarCraft 2 specifically, Blizzard has been slowly stepping away from supporting the professional StarCraft 2 scene, with both the WCS circuit and BlizzCon being replaced by the ESL circuit and the IEM Katowice Global Finals. So I wouldn't say StarCraft 2 scene is booming, especially with the Korean scene basically drying up slowly but surely, but there's still a solid competitive circuit with the Global Finals in place. I personally still enjoy it every year. I watch every Global Finals. So I think fertility-wise, StarCraft 2 is in a fine spot. And if you look at the RTS scene, we have AoE 4, AoE 2, StarCraft 2, Brood War. Like, RTSs are being played and are being watched. So, it doesn't score ridiculously high, but I think we're fine. It's the last point that kind of makes me uncomfortable. Somehow, I'm quite surprised by it actually, but like the uniqueness, the unique selling points of StarCraft 2 is what makes me uncomfortable. Because for the last 13 years, it has always been a no-brainer that if you want a fast-paced, mechanically challenging RTS with a buttery smooth engine, of course, you play StarCraft 2 and you can click a lot of buttons. Like, playing good StarCraft just hits different than any other game. Almost every StarCraft 2 game you play, you can get into like the flow state. Since the game is so fast, you just have to execute what you know and focus on execution. And then after that, you can watch the replay and make adjustments for the next game. But now there's this little game called Stormgate, and that has a bunch of old Blizzard devs, and they're making a spiritual successor. So, I guess in the end it all depends on what Stormgate will bring to the table, and if it will scratch that StarCraft 2 itch, in a sense. Like, will it be like Ultimate coming out and then Smash 4 dying overnight, where Stormgate releases and StarCraft 2 dies overnight? Well, I don't think so. I don't think it will be that extreme. Stormgate is still decently far off from being available to the actual general public, like an actual release. And it seems to be hinting at a more modern release schedule where, the game could potentially end up in a beta purgatory for years. So it won't be like shock and awe. But even though the StarCraft 2 community seems to be fiending for a new toy to play with, kind of like getting that second chance, most of us have stuck around StarCraft 2 for a different reason, I think. Like, we stuck around because, for the deepness and the legacy of StarCraft 2, kind of like Brood War in a sense. Like, StarCraft 2 has aged quite well, and it has now become a game that is just played at a crazy high level where you have to practice and play for a couple years to even get close to some of these insane players. And it's just a treat to watch and enjoy, even if you don't play the game that much yourself anymore. Like, what I'm trying to say is that if you wanted new toys as a StarCraft 2 enjoyer, you've had plenty of opportunities to jump ship in the last 13 years. So, can Stormgate really scratch that itch? If that itch is even static, it might move over time. I think only time can tell. I just feel like there's a lot more StarCraft 2 to be played, and I'm looking forward to find out what the future holds.